In this video, we're going to begin the reloading of the 308 Winchester by sorting the brass that we're going to be using. You'll notice on the table here in front of me I have 10 cases. I normally only load 10 to 20 rounds when I'm starting with a minimum load, because in all probability I'm going to be loading up from that point. But I do want to be able to do multiple 3 to 5 shot groups, because in addition to measuring velocity, I want to also be able to measure the accuracy of the load. There's 4 things that we need to look for basically when we're sorting the brass. First one is dirt. The second one is damage. The third one is the presence or absence of a military crimp. And then the fourth one is the overall length of the case. As far as dirt's concerned, surface dirt's not a problem if it can be wiped off. Being tarnished is not a problem. You don't want to be inserting overly dirty cases in dies. If they're steel dies, you're going to be scoring and damaging the surface inside the die. If you're dealing with carbide dies, they're so much harder that you're going to be driving the particles of dirt into the brass and prematurely shortening the life of the brass itself. But being tarnished, not being pretty, is not a qualification for not reloading. You can tumble them in corncob or walnut media. If you want pretty cases, there are sonic cleaners, there's stainless steel media, but people generally tumble brass primarily from the standpoint of aesthetics as opposed to practical reloading. Now there's one other consideration, and we'll get into that when we do the resizing, and that's the presence of lube on the cases. But not being overly dirty is a great starting point. As far as damage is concerned, if you look at the pictures on your screen, you'll see the first is an example of a case that has a ding in the side of it. It appears to have been damaged, probably being ejected from a firearm, and it hit a concrete edge or something on the way out and caused that crease. In all probability, that little ding would fireform out of the case if it were loaded and fired in a firearm. However, if you look more closely at the mouth of this case, there's some very unusual damage that almost appears to have been the result of excess heat, and that would absolutely disqualify that case from reloading, so we'll eliminate that. Now, if you look at the crimps on the cases, this first picture is of a case that does not have a military crimp. It has a smooth edge all the way to the inside portions of the primer pocket. In this second image, by comparison, you can see around the primer itself there's a depressed area, and that's where the primer has actually been staked into the pinned into the primer pocket so that it can stand up to very severe service in military applications. Now, there's another way of doing a military crimp that I don't have a picture of, but you'll notice distinct pock-like marks at the edge of the primer pocket where the primer is also staked in, and that's frequently called a staked method of doing a military crimp. But if you have either of those, if you don't have the smooth edge around the primer pocket, at this point you should eliminate it from consideration rather than dealing with the military crimps. In this last picture, you're going to see the reason why. This is the result of trying to insert a primer in a primer pocket that had a military crimp that was not adequately removed before the primer was attempted to be inserted. The last thing we want to do here is to measure the length of the cases. Now, remember from our developing the information that we needed for the reloading, there's a maximum length that's allowable in the cases. Unlike pistol brass, which generally does not elongate to the point where it needs to be trimmed, rifle brass does. If it's repeatedly reloaded and fired, generally the necks will elongate to the point where they will exceed the maximum case length. Now, you could measure these with calipers, but an easier way to do it is to use a tool such as this Lyman case gauge, where you simply insert the case and hold it in the appropriate spot, in this case for the 308 Winchester. And if you'll notice on the left-hand side of your screen, there's even a measurement, which is the overall length of 2.015 inches. It's simply go or no go, unless you're dealing with extremely high high accuracy loads, you don't need to be trimming these to exact lengths. You simply need to be determining that they're not over the maximum allowable length for reload. So we have our cases here sorted out. They're not overly dirty. We've eliminated any that were damaged. We've eliminated any that had signs of a military crimp, and we've made sure that they all were the correct length to continue the process of reloading the .308 Winchester.